How is it going, everybody? Welcome to another figure review video. Of course, something that I don't do too frequently, but every once in a while a figure arrives that I can't pass up the opportunity to, make a whole video highlighting its existence. Today, that is the Haolonggood Paraceratherium. Now, there's just no way I could pass up the opportunity to talk about this. Paraceratherium is one of my favorite extinct animals. It's just an incredibly interesting creature, and we're going to, of course, unbox this, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. So let's just get on that. Now, fortunately, judging by the box, this guy is a little bit larger than, say, their woolly rhino. Because I did pick up their woolly rhino, and it was a little bit on the small size, but I assume that's because most of these guys are to scale. Paraceratherium appears to be, yeah, it appears to be pretty large, which is, wow, which is probably what you would expect from one of the largest land mammals to ever exist. Holy cow, oh, I'm so happy. You have no idea. This is actually really extremely cool. I need to get a closer camera angle for this. Now, here's a better look at the beautiful creature itself. Now, Paraceratherium is a giant relative of modern day rhinos. It is closely related to those fellas. And you can kind of see that in the way that it's portrayed right here. That face very much looks like a rhino face. Even the ears look very similar to modern day rhinos. The feet are also pretty similar, and the texturing and the coloration of the skin also remind me of rhinos. So the design in general, I'm sure, is meant to make you think of rhinos, which is, I think, is a good route to take. Now, like I mentioned, this figure is huge. Like, it's a pretty darn big figure, which I am really happy about because that is an accurate representation of Paraceratherium. Paraceratherium is one of the largest land mammals to ever exist. It was incredibly large. I say one of because there was possibly another mammal that was larger, that being the straight-tusked elephant known as Paleoloxodon. However, the jury is still out on that. Paleoloxodon is still pretty fragmentary, so it's hard to say for sure. But we can say with certainty that Paraceratherium was one of the largest, which I think is still an impressive feat. It had a head shape that is pretty similar to what you can see right here, and I noticed that they gave it a proboscis, which is the consensus for the animal. It was once thought by some experts to have a sort of tapir-like trunk instead of the proboscis that you see right here. But instead, more recent analysis seems to suggest that, much like rhinos, it had just basically like a larger lip like this. So that is also pretty accurate. It was a tall animal with these extended legs, as you can see, and of course a longer neck that would help it reach the higher vegetation. In a lot of ways, these guys were kind of like the mammal's answer to sauropod dinosaurs. And this is probably about as large as mammals could get. Now, one question that I am frequently asked when it comes to land animals is why have mammals never reached the same heights as dinosaurs did on the land? Because even though Paraceratherium was an extremely big mammal, one that surpassed the modern day African elephant, it's still kind of small compared to the largest of the sauropods. Why exactly was that? Well, there's a few different reasons. For one, sauropod dinosaurs were just a little bit more efficient at breathing. They had a series of air sacs that would store extra oxygen and thereby made it so that they constantly had oxygen in their body, which is very different from, mammals, for example. Look at us. We breathe in and then we breathe out. We breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. As we breathe out, we lose a little bit of the oxygen that we just breathed in. That is something that helps contribute to larger sizes. And it's not the oxygen level in the atmosphere. I see that misconception going around a lot. A lot of people think that dinosaurs got to be so big because oxygen levels were higher back in the Mesozoic, and that's just not the case for a few different reasons. One of my favorite reasons that I like to bring up to people is that, during much of the Jurassic period, a point in time where there was all kinds of sauropod dinosaurs, the largest dinosaurs to ever walk the earth, the oxygen levels were actually lower than they are today. So that shows us that oxygen levels don't affect vertebrate sizes. It's just what they do with the oxygen that can help do that. Another big reason why sauropods got to be so big and mammals don't is because sauropods have the luxury of laying eggs. They were egg-laying reptiles. That is incredibly helpful because it's less damaging for the mother. Sauropods can lay a ton of eggs. They were capable of laying just just a bunch of little grapefruits in a little bit of a nest. And then after they would lay them, they would simply just leave, thereby leaving all of those eggs to hatch on their own, kind of like modern day sea turtles. Now, the fact that they can lay a ton of eggs ensures that at the very least some of them will survive into adulthood and continue the species. Obviously, a lot of them probably won't make it, but that's a sacrifice that the sauropods are willing to make. And because they leave the babies to essentially fend for themselves, they don't have to waste a lot of energy trying to take care of those babies because they already laid a ton of eggs. You know, there's a better chance that some of them will make it. That is in stark contrast to mammals like Paraceratherium or Paleoloxodon, for example, who were placental mammals, which means that they gave live birth. Now, giving live birth is of course an incredibly taxing process, and it becomes even more difficult for animals that reach larger sizes. The reason being, the larger you become, the larger of an infant that you have to create. A big animal like Paraceratherium would have to create a large baby. You can see the same thing today with modern day elephants. And because the baby is so large, they have a longer gestation period. Elephants, for example, have a gestation period of around 2 years. And more often than not, it's only one baby that they are currently growing. Now, that's something that is incredibly taxing on the mother, and it's something that could potentially be taxing on the infant. And when you eventually get to the point after the 2 years that you give birth, well, you only have one baby to show for it, and that baby is still vulnerable to predation, it's vulnerable to illness. There's a chance that that baby won't make it to adulthood. And so it's a little bit more difficult to continue the species when you get to be as large as you are. It becomes a little bit more risky. Paraceratherium likely had a long gestation period, probably over 2 years or so. And so that is something that is, of course, taxing for Paraceratherium. I mean, once Paraceratherium reached its adult size, there's not really many predators who would, want to tussle with it. But when it's just a little baby, it was likely a prime target. In fact, we see that very same thing in Walking with Beasts, the Paraceratherium episode. When the baby was first born, there was a bunch of hyenodons trying to take it out. That was probably a pretty realistic portrayal of what it's like to be a Paraceratherium. And so basically, to summarize all of that, it's a lot easier to lay a ton of eggs than it is to give birth to a ton of offspring. So mammals are at a disadvantage in that department, which means that they can't really afford to get much larger than something like Paraceratherium. At least, of course, that goes for land mammals. In the waters, in the oceans, the largest animal to ever exist is a mammal, that being the blue whale. But in a lot of cases, they have the water to help them out. Land mammals don't really get that luxury. So those are some of the main reasons why land mammals never reach the same epic proportions that sauropods would reach. Still doesn't make Paraceratherium any less impressive. It was an insanely large mammal and just a very cool one. I'm so glad that I finally have a figure of one. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. Now all I need is a scientifically accurate Simosuchus and a scientifically accurate Inostransavia. And then I'll have almost all of my my absolute favorite extinct animals to ever exist. Because I currently have Pachyrhinosaurus, I have Spinosaurus, and now I have Paraceratherium. So we're getting there. We are getting there. But thank you guys for listening to my little tangent. Of course, like I said, that was just a question that I've seen floating around a lot, and I figured this was a good opportunity to speak on it. It's a beautiful figure. I have no complaints whatsoever. I am so incredibly happy about this. You have no idea. So that's pretty much all I have for this one. Thank you all so much for watching today's video, and you know what? You have an awesome day. I mean it. Oh yeah, and here it is compared to some of the other Haolonggood figures that I have. Like here's the T-Rex, Triceratops, Shantungosaurus, Argentinosaurus, and of course Paraceratherium. And it's one of the larger figures, like one of the larger Haolonggood figures that I have. So beautiful. I love it.